before we begin, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and subscribe. We're trying our best. Life in rural Russia has always been hard. Our small town, numbering less than 80,000 people, could have been considered a hopeless place by most standards. There were limited chances of accumulating wealth, very small chances of leaving our town to live in one of the bigger cities, and no vacations to exotic destinations, or any destinations to be precise. But although we were lacking in some aspects of life, other things were decent. We could afford food, and we had good access to health care. The latter was especially important for Russia because of our aging population. Most of the young people were moving to the bigger cities, and the need for neonatal wards had diminished in some small towns, such as ours. The median age of doctors was above 65. Our town had spent 7 years without a neonatology ward. For those of you who are not familiar with the terminology, a neonatologist is someone who takes care of newborns in the first 28 days of their lives and handles newborn babies with problems immediately after birth. You can imagine what a surprise it was when, 2 years ago, a relatively young doctor came from St. Petersburg to work in our hospital as a neonatologist. Dr. Grigory Fyodorov, or Grisha for short, had come from St. Petersburg to our town. Pregnancy wasn't that common in our town, but there were still some young people trying to create a happy family here. Also, some of the villages near our town were served by our hospital, so the patient inflow was larger than our population. Births were, let's say, a weekly occurrence. Everyone was happy that Dr. Grisha had joined. A local newspaper even wrote an article about him. According to the article, Dr. Grigory Fyodorov was 37 years old and had spent his whole life in St. Petersburg, where he studied medicine and specialized in neonatology. His wife had died in a car crash, and shortly after, his parents passed away. He then decided to spend the rest of his life helping those most in need, the babies being born in rural Russia. The article also mentioned that Dr. Fyodorov had developed an interest in producing medicines, not discovering new cures for incurable diseases, but basic production of life-saving, well-known medications that weren't easy to find in rural Russia. For the 2 years that Dr. Fyodorov worked in our town, approximately 80 babies were saved by him. According to his own records, 2 of them were saved thanks to him producing a medication given to prematurely born infants known as surfactant, some type of oil that keeps their lungs from collapsing. This persuaded the hospital to give him a few offices in the basement to try to produce more, and they even delegated a small budget to support him. Of course, not all risky pregnancies had a happy ending. A few babies passed away, and 2 of them unfortunately died shortly after their mothers passed away while giving birth. The fathers were furious and accused the hospital staff, including Dr. Fyodorov, of malpractice that, in their words, led to the deaths of their wives and newborn children. One of the fathers, Alexei, started drinking heavily after the accident. The other, Seva, had a daughter who was 5 years old and was holding up because of her. Seva is a colleague of mine. We work together at the local municipality as food safety inspectors. He is the reason why I know so much about Dr. Fyodorov. After the accident, life became mundane and sad in our small, God-forsaken town. This was until recently, when Seva was assigned to go to training in St. Petersburg to get updated on the new food regulations that were being implemented. I was the one our boss originally wanted to send, but the journey included taking a train to a bigger city and then flying on a plane to St. Petersburg and back. The thought terrified me. I had never boarded a plane, and so Seva was chosen instead, leaving his daughter with the parents of his deceased wife. Upon returning, he seemed very agitated and one night invited me to drink at his home after his daughter had fallen asleep. These are some of the things he told me. This is not possible. It must be a mistake. He might have made a mistake in the case of Svetlana, but he has saved many other lives. He couldn't be an imposter. He is a doctor, for sure. I responded. "He has a point." Okay. Are you sure those people in St. Petersburg were correct? Are you sure they checked thoroughly? And also, if he moved here, wouldn't his records be moved to our district?" I asked. Okay. Hopefully, it is just a series of unfortunate events. The rest of the night, we continued talking about nothing important. 2 weeks later, Seva told me that the guy he bribed said there was only one diploma matching the name and that it was issued 74 years ago, indicating that Dr. Fyodorov would be 104 years old. This meant that either he was using a dead man's license and was indeed an imposter who endangered the children of our town, or that Seva was going crazy. He said that he managed to get a meeting with the governor, who told him that Dr. Fyodorov had a valid license and had indeed graduated from medical school in St. Petersburg. I decided to drop it right then and there. A few months passed. Seva was still very suspicious and started entertaining the idea of spying on Dr. Fyodorov. I urged him not to do it and to accept that bad things unfortunately happen for no reason to good people. His wife had been operated on by another doctor, and even if Fyodorov was an imposter, he wasn't responsible for her death. His responsibility was for the child, which, according to Dr. Fyodorov, had been infected with bacteria during development and was severely ill even before birth. Seva claimed that he had managed to see his child for a full minute and that it looked completely normal. I told him that maybe he was mistaken. A few more weeks passed with nothing significant, until I ended up drinking with some friends very late one Saturday. In Russia, it is customary to drink with friends at home, but this time we were drinking in front of an apartment building. Most people had already left, but I was so drunk that I wanted more. That's when I noticed Alexei, the father of the other woman and child who had passed away in the presence of Dr. Fyodorov. He was stumbling home, visibly drunk and holding an almost full bottle. I waved at him. He noticed me and waved back. "In the mood for some company?" I asked. "Always, friend?" "Come, let's go to my home. It's getting cold here." So we went to his apartment, which was a mess, rubbish all over the place, empty bottles, and what I presumed were cockroaches. We continued drinking and talking about nothing until he started telling me about his newborn son who had passed away. He then started crying. I tried comforting him, and after I was sure he was okay, I went back home as the sun was rising. The next day, I called Seva and told him that he might have been right all along. He then told me that for the last month he had been spying on Fyodorov. According to him, nothing suspicious had happened. He went to work, went home, and sometimes went drinking with other doctors. Two things, however, were suspicious. He wasn't interested in any women, and every few days he stayed until very late at night in the basement offices to work on the medicines he was supposedly preparing. Seva wanted to visit his basement offices, and after extensive discussion, I reluctantly agreed to help, but I would be the one to go inside. On a Friday night, we went for it. We entered the hospital through the emergency department. I said that I had a fever and lied that I had vomited several times. While I was waiting to be examined by the doctors, Seva snuck down one of the corridors and went downstairs. As I was waiting, an old woman with what looked like a broken arm was brought in. I excused myself to the nurse. The nurse thanked me for understanding, and I quickly left the hospital trying to locate the basement office windows. After wandering for a few minutes, I noticed the blinds of one of the small windows being lifted and a light moving inside. This must have been Seva. I went to investigate, and from what I could see through the window, which was near the ceiling of the office, it was what one would expect from a small medicine production office. Different bottles everywhere, some equipment, and a large wooden table covered with a white cloth similar to the ones used to wrap newborn babies. The only strange thing was that there were too many church candles. In Orthodox Christianity, the one mostly practiced in Russia, the candles are very thin and yellow. It was odd to see such candles in a laboratory, but maybe he used them to heat things. Seva signaled me to go away, and I did. I waited half an hour for him to emerge from the hospital. Find anything suspicious? No, to be honest, I didn't, except for the candles. Nothing out of the ordinary, he said. Let's go somewhere warm and talk there. We went to what in America might be considered a diner, ordered beers and some food, and he explained that he didn't find anything suspicious. There were a lot of chemicals, but that was expected in medicine production. Seva admitted that maybe he had actually lost his mind and was behaving irrationally. I agreed, but he said he had left the blinds open in case we decided to take another peek. In the following weeks, Seva went a few more times. He said that on one occasion, Fyodorov was there just mixing and weighing stuff, nothing out of the ordinary. This was until today. Today, in the early evening, a mother passed away after giving birth to a baby boy. The boy was taken to the neonatology ward in critical condition. We found out through some of our colleagues who are medical inspectors. We spent the night taking turns checking the offices. It's already very cold in this part of Russia, so we took 30-minute shifts while the other waited in the car parked nearby. I don't even know why I went along with it, but I guess being too old to start a family and living in the middle of nowhere left me with the desire to do something adventurous. Around 3 in the morning, during my turn, the light came on. I went closer to investigate. At first, he just lit the candles, cleared everything from the big wooden table with the baby cloth on it, and placed the candles in a circle around it. Then, he turned toward the windows. I quickly ducked out of his view. I felt like I could hear his breathing. I heard the blinds closing. I stayed down for a full minute, then heard the door on the inside close. Shit, is he coming to check on me? I thought. I was torn between bolting for the car or confronting him. But after 2 more minutes, I heard the door open again and heard the crying of a baby. What happened next is hard to explain. It was like there was wind inside the room. A storm confined in a jar. I could hear the baby crying and some chanting that was neither in English nor Russian. After a few minutes, the crying stopped and the wind sound faded. Then I heard the sound of a body dropping on the floor. It took all my courage, but I decided to take a look. Illuminated by the faint candlelight, I saw the baby unmoving on the table and Fyodorov collapsed on the floor. He looked like he had aged beyond 80, but I wasn't sure because the lights were too dim. From what I remember, his gray hair started turning blonde, and his limp body seemed to grow muscle at the rate of seconds. This was the moment I decided to get the hell out of there. I ran to the car and yelled at Seva to drive, and he did. We went to my place and I told him what I had seen, but he didn't seem to believe me. This changed the next morning, when the baby of the deceased mother was pronounced dead. According to the news, Dr. Fyodorov had spent the whole night trying to keep it alive, but at some point around 3:30 in the morning, the baby passed away due to heart problems. My neighbor's front door has been wide open for 2 days. Since it was a sunny Friday afternoon, I didn't think much of it at first. It was 5:30, and I had just returned home from work. When I saw that my neighbor's front door was open, I assumed that she was simply unloading something from her car. I went inside my own house and went through my usual after-work routine, going for a run and then making dinner for my wife, Alice, and me. It was only in the evening that I began to suspect something was wrong. I was taking our dog, Bailey, out for her final walk of the day. It was nautical twilight, my favorite time to be outdoors. I've always enjoyed strolling around the block with Bailey in those last, precious moments when there's still enough light to see the horizon. I put Bailey's harness on her as she excitedly hopped around. Then the two of us stepped out into the cool night. After a few seconds, I looked up and noticed that the door to my neighbor's house, the one directly across the street, was still wide open. Also strange was the fact that, despite her car being in the driveway, the house was completely dark, not a single light on inside. I crossed the street. My neighbor is a 20-something named Isabel. She seems like a sweet girl, but we aren't exactly good friends. Sometimes I give her lemons from our tree in exchange for figs, and that's pretty much the extent of our relationship. Still, the sight of that open door made me uneasy. What if she had some kind of medical emergency and was currently unconscious or worse on the floor of her entryway? After a few steps up the driveway, the leash in my hand went taut. Looking down, I saw that Bailey had seated herself firmly on the ground, refusing to budge even as I called her name and tugged on the leash. Her ears were pricked up, her eyes fixed on the house like she was waiting for something. Though she wasn't growling, I was unnerved by her alert posture and her refusal to walk any closer to the door. I let my voice close the distance between us and my neighbor's threshold. "Isabel?" It's Brian from across the street. "Can you hear me?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, just as I was about to drop Bailey's leash and walk up the steps to the house, there came a voice from the dark. "Hey, Brian," she said, before coughing once and then clearing her throat. "Sorry, I'm in the middle of dinner here." "What's up?" I breathed a sigh of relief. "Hey, sorry, I just saw that your front door was open. Wanted to make sure you knew." Strangely, there came another long pause. I knew she was inside the house now, and close enough to the door to hold a conversation with me, so what was the delay? "Isabel! Oh, you're so sweet to check in." "Yes, I know it's open. It's just been so hot today that I wanted to let the breeze in. I'll close it soon." "Of course. Have a good night then." "You too." With that, I tugged Bailey back down the driveway, and the two of us completed our walk. I returned home, happy that my neighbor was all right, and went to sleep. Saturday was a much-needed lazy day. I woke up at 10, ate the breakfast that Alice made, then spent some time in the backyard with her and Bailey. It was an overcast day, and by 3 p.m. or so, a light rainfall forced us back inside. Alice took a call from her sister, who lives at the edge of our neighborhood, while I went to the living room to throw on some television. Except, before I could get comfortable, I looked out the front window and was surprised to see that Isabel's front door was open again. Open again, I wondered. Or was it never shut? I got up close to the window and studied the house across the street. The rain was coming down harder by then, and the thick gray clouds overhead made it seem like nighttime. Despite this, there wasn't a single light on inside of Isabel's house. It was so dark inside that the entrance to her house seemed less like a door and more like a black, painted rectangle on the exterior wall. I turned to look at Bailey, who was laying on a nearby couch, and saw that she was also looking out the window. Ears pressed against her head, she glanced at me briefly, then refocused her attention outside. I couldn't tell if she was simply people-watching, or if somehow she too could sense something wrong. Just then, Alice walked into the living room. She was no longer on the phone, and she greeted me with a strange, almost nervous smile. "That was an odd conversation," she said, taking a seat next to Bailey. "Everything all right?" "I don't know. Clara saw a woman peeking into her house a few nights ago." "What? Creepy, right? And she's not the only one. Apparently there have been a few reports on her side of town. Other people experiencing the same thing. Nothing stolen and no one hurt. At least that Clara knows of. But it's still pretty weird. Let's make sure we lock up extra well tonight." My thoughts drifted to my neighbor. I asked my wife what this woman looked like. Like I said, Isabel and I weren't close, but I knew she had recently gone through a difficult breakup with a long-term boyfriend. It was far-fetched to assume a connection between Isabel and the mystery woman, but who knew? Heartbreak makes people do crazy things. Maybe there was some link between the two. Alice hesitated for a minute. "Well," she eventually said, "you know Clara. She's got a real superstitious way about her. She's always telling stories." "What does that mean?" "It means you've got to take this with a grain of salt." When Alice relayed Clara's description of the woman, I felt a chill run down my spine. Clara said that the woman was tall and gaunt. enough so that she originally mistook her for a man. She said that her skin looked too tight across her face and that her eyes looked unnaturally deep-set, as though they were too far back in her skull. Apparently, when she saw that Clara had spotted her, she had given Clara a big smile before retreating into the night. Apparently, when she smiled, she had too many teeth. I was silent for a moment, unsure what to make of Clara's morbid sighting. Love, was Isabel's front door open this morning? She considered my question as she pet Bailey. I think it was. If nothing else, I figured I should at least tell Isabel to be careful. I put on my raincoat and headed outside, carefully making my way down the wet driveway. Once I made it to the sidewalk, I heard frantic barking coming from behind me. Turning around, I saw Bailey in the window, her paws resting on the sill, her growls and whimpers rising over the heavy rain. My wife appeared next to her a few seconds later. She attempted, unsuccessfully, to comfort Bailey, giving me a questioning look as she did so. I gave her a shrug in return, then crossed the street. I stopped at the bottom of Isabel's porch steps and listened. Like before, I could hear someone inside, though I couldn't tell exactly what was going on. I heard a deep, wet ripping sound, like something being torn. Also, like before, I couldn't see a thing inside the house. A voice called out from the dark interior. "Brian!" "Hello again," I said, only wondering in retrospect how she could have known it was me. "Sorry to bother you again, but I wanted to tell you something. Would you mind coming out for a minute?" "Brian," she repeated, tone almost reprimanding. "This isn't a good time. You always seem to catch me in the middle of a meal." "It won't take long." I tried persuading. When she didn't respond, I climbed up a few steps. "Isabel, there's been some suspicious activity around the neighborhood recently. I know you like to keep the door open for the breeze, but maybe you ought to keep it shut today." "Aw, but I'm so comfortable here on the couch." "Why don't you close the door for me?" The couch? Wasn't she in the middle of a meal? Even if she were eating on the couch, her voice sounded so close, like she couldn't have been more than a few feet away from me. Was she hiding behind the door? I climbed up the rest of the steps, trying to recall the inside of her house from the 2 or 3 times I'd been inside. I knew that the room immediately to the left of the entryway was the living room, and most likely where Isabel was supposedly sitting. I also knew that there was a light switch right next to the front door. What the hell, I thought. I'll just go inside for a minute, say hello, and then shut the door for her. It'll give me some peace of mind to actually see her instead of just hearing her voice. I glanced over my shoulder toward my own house. Bailey was still barking her head off, which was unnerving, but the sight of Alice keeping an eye on me gave me some peace of mind. It was just a house, I told myself, just a normal house with my own neighbor inside of it. Taking a deep breath, I stood at the threshold, shocked at how, despite my closeness, the inside of the house remained pitch black. I thrust a hand inside and it disappeared like I dipped it into oil. As I groped around for the light switch, my fingers brushed against something solid, something fleshy. I jerked my hand back, certain that I'd just touched a person. "Isabel?" I asked the darkness, and then from inches away came the sound of laughter. The laugh was deep, gravelly, and mocking, and it did not resemble my neighbor's voice in the slightest. Before I could react, I heard the quick pitter-patter of footsteps against wood. It grew quieter and quieter, and I realized that it was the sound of someone running away from me. After a few seconds, I thought I heard a door open and shut in the distance. The back door, perhaps? Again, I stuck my arm inside, and this time, I was able to find the light switch. I turned on the light and was relieved when the interior of the house revealed itself to me. A normal entryway with a normal coat rack and a normal shoe rack. No eerie intruders in sight. However, the relief was short-lived, because when I stepped inside the house, I turned to the left, walked into the living room, and was greeted by the sight of my neighbor, or at least what was left of her. She was splayed out atop a couch, her head lolled off the side, her empty eye sockets and toothless, wide-open mouth looked like 3 holes had been dug into her face. Her face itself was red, not as I initially thought because it was covered in blood, but because it was missing its skin. She had been flayed, not only her face but her arms and the top part of her torso. It looked like someone had been methodically working their way down her body until I had interrupted them. Paralyzed by fear and confusion, I stood in place. I waited to wake up from a nightmare. I waited for Isabel to walk in from an adjoining room and tell me that I was looking at a Halloween prop. I waited for a dangerously long time, and then I staggered out into the rain. When I returned home, I immediately called the police, though I had trouble putting what I'd seen into words. They arrived quickly, took my analysis statements, and then went across the street to investigate. It's been days now. They haven't told me anything. Despite my repeated calls to the station, I can't get answers, can't sleep, can't eat. I just keep replaying the discovery over and over in my mind's eye. The voice, the feeling of brushing against a body in the dark, and of course the sight of that poor girl's mangled corpse. I have too many questions to count, but 3 rise above the rest. Who the hell was I talking to? How did they sound so perfectly like my neighbor? And why is it that every night since I found the body, Bailey hasn't stopped sitting by the front door and growling?
6-year-old female. I've been living in my current apartment for 7 years now and still do. But my next-door neighbor has been living in this apartment building since the 80s, so he's at least half my age, 53 to be exact. Also, I need to mention that my neighbor has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. I know this because I live in an area where a lot of people also know this guy. He used to be an artist and a teacher at a university. But ever since he got diagnosed, he has been struggling with finding a new job, maintaining his social and private life. I don't have any stigmas around mental disorders. In fact, I often feel quite empathetic towards people who suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illness. But he's overall quite an aggressive and short-tempered person. He is also very huge. I would say at least 2 meters tall, and weight probably over 100 kilograms. So, therefore, there's a reason all of the other neighbors, including me, people who used to know him and befriend him, are now afraid of him, tries not to agitate him, although sometimes it's a challenge. Since I've been living in my apartment, there have been multiple, I don't even remember all, occasions where my next-door neighbor has tried to strike up some kind of conversations with me. Mostly when he's in his manic state and soon to be hospitalized. Sometimes I don't see him for weeks, even months. But sometimes he is ringing my house multiple times a day, always asking for some kind of favors or just wanting to talk to me about random topics. The first time this happened was 6.5 years ago, about half a year after I started living in my apartment. The first time I talked to him was after me and my university friend at that time were both walking to my apartment after a night out. We were both quite tipsy, and as we approached the doors of my apartment building, we both had a little bit of struggle unlocking the code to get inside, because the lock system is quite old and glitchy. Suddenly, we both heard a man's voice saying something to us from behind. He said, "Hello, girls. What are you doing?" Trying to sound friendly, although we both got startled by him approaching and getting super close to us. We both looked at each other and then at him, and I replied, "Hello. We are trying to get inside the building, but the code and lock is glitching." He looked at me for about 10 seconds, looking me up and down while smirking. Mind you, I was 19 at the time, and it made me feel quite uncomfortable. Then he asked, "Do you live here? Is your apartment number 13? I got really uncomfortable after him asking me this question, but I really didn't know how to react, so I said, "Yes." Then he smiled and asked, "Isn't your name Stacy?" Which is my name. I looked at my friend and saw that she too felt really creeped out by these questions. We both stayed silent for a while, and then he said, "Okay, girls, I'll help you open the door." He helped us, We got inside the hallway, but it felt so unsettling because he literally saw us go into my apartment while unlocking his doors and going inside. Some time went by, I would say maybe 2 months, and nothing happened. Then one weekday morning I woke up at around 6 a.m. in my apartment because my doorbell was ringing. I also lived there alone at the time. Since I don't have a peephole on my doors, I felt quite paranoid and scared to let anyone know I was home unless I was expecting someone to come over. I always pretended I'm not home. I don't do this anymore though. The ringing stopped after a while. Since I felt quite scared and confused, why would someone ring my doorbell this early in the morning, I decided to wake up and get ready for the day. I only had to leave my house at 11 a.m., so I had few morning hours for myself and to study. At around 9 a.m., my doorbell rang again. I pretended I'm not home, but now I had a feeling that the person who was ringing my doorbell is somebody from my apartment building, because otherwise, why would somebody wait 3 hours to ring my doorbell again? I felt super creeped out and tried to be as quiet as possible. At 11 a.m., I had to leave my house, so I tried to exit my apartment as quietly as possible. As I started to lock my apartment doors, I heard my neighbor's doors unlock and him stepping out in the hallway and saying, "Hello there. I've been trying to reach you the whole morning. Why didn't you answer? I knew you were at home." I started to panic, but didn't want him to notice it. I replied, "Hello, I was sleeping. I probably didn't hear the doorbell ringing." He didn't seem to believe my answer, but continued, "I've been trying to reach you all morning because we have a lot of things to discuss. We don't have much time, but because of me handling everything, all is under control for now. You need to look what I've left under your entrace rug." He was mumbling a bunch of nonsense, and I realized the guy ain't right in his mind, maybe having a manic episode or something, because he was talking about obscure things that he needs to take care of, but I really didn't understand anything. He asked me once more to look under my entrance door rug, so I looked. Underneath it was a trowel/spatula that was broken in half. I was so confused, but he kept on going about how I needed to help him and hide it somewhere, because he has done something with it that he can't further elaborate to me. At this point I was so scared I just ran out of the apartment building without replying to him nor looking back. I heard him running after me for a while, but then he stopped. In the evening I was super scared to come home, but I didn't really have a choice, so home I went. Not even few hours went by when my doorbell was ringing again. This time I answered, "Who's there?" without opening my doors. My neighbor answered, "Hi. I just wanted to apologize about what I said earlier today. I just have so many things to tell you." He went on mumbling about complete nonsense. He said that he is currently playing a real-life simulation game called Quest, that I play a part in this game, and that there is something hidden in the garden house outside our apartment. He won't tell me what it is, and that I need to come outside with him and check it out myself. I obviously refused and instantly called my dad, because he lives just a few blocks away from me, and I asked him to please come over and help me talk some sense in my neighbor and ask him to leave me alone. The worst thing is that my dad came over and had a talk with my neighbor, and thought that this guy is completely sane, and said I was overreacting. Maybe the guy tried to be nice and polite to my dad, I don't know, but it left me feeling unsettled. The next day I was informed that my neighbor demolished our hallway and some of the mailboxes attached to the wall by the entrance. He also smashed a window and a light bulb in the hallway. From what I gathered, he was being aggressive towards his girlfriend and few other neighbors from our building. Police and ambulance was called, and he allegedly got hospitalized. I also learned that after this incident, he broke up with his long-term girlfriend. That just really made him spiral downwards. For a few years, I barely even saw the neighbor, and if I saw him, we just said hello to each other, and that's about it. But he started bothering me again 2 years ago. I'm not really scared of him anymore. Maybe because my boyfriend moved in with me. Maybe because I grew up a little and didn't feel as helpless and paranoid. Maybe because he barely talked to me for 3 to 4 years. But still, if there are situations where I talk to him, I try not to agitate him. Besides, I feel like I'm the only person he doesn't try to intimidate or be aggressive towards. Don't know why, though. It all started happening again in the November of 2023, when he started ringing our doorbell many times a day. When I first answered him, I dared to open the door because my boyfriend was beside me. He said, "Hello. I came up to you because I wanted to let you know I'm working on a new project and therefore I might listen to some music. I like to turn it up quite a bit, but I hope that you won't mind." I could see the guy was swerving and barely kept his eyes open. He also stank of alcohol and was holding a burnt-out blunt in his fingers, although there's no smoking policy in our apartments or hallways. I replied, "Well, I understand. I also like to listen to music loudly, but please don't blast music late at night when everyone's asleep." He smirked and then said, "I know. I've heard you listening to music many times." I got a bit confused about how he knows that, because I don't listen to music that loudly, but okay. So from that time on, he started blasting music 24/7, and there was no way of making him turn it down. If anything, I felt like he fed from the agitation of other neighbors and us pleading him to turn the volume down. I regretted that I ever said it was okay, because there were several times me and my boyfriend woke up at around 3 a.m. because the music was so loud our walls were shaking. We tried calling police, which was useless, turning off electricity, banging on his doors and asking him to stop. We realized the best option is to just ignore it and use earplugs or something, because he just really wanted to pick up a fight with my boyfriend. Every time my boyfriend would go to him and ask to turn the music down, he would get super aggressive and yell at him, saying, "You're not my neighbor. Stacy is my neighbor, and if she's bothered, she should come up to me personally and address her concerns." Which I did, but nothing ever changed. This went on till at least end of January 2024. At the same time, there were several times when I was smoking in the garden of our apartment building. Many times he would notice me through his window and then come outside to talk to me, asking me personal questions, complimenting me on my looks and talking about his projects. He also hoarded lots of random stuff in our garden because he wanted to make a little garden house workstation for himself and a bomb shelter in our basement. But he never did anything with those materials. He once asked me if I liked if he made me a bench so I could sit while smoking. I said no. One evening I was outside smoking and I noticed him taking out several garbage bags outside the basement. It looked like he was cleaning the basement out. It just gave me weird vibes. Then he came up to me and asked for lighters. I gave him, didn't take them back, and went inside. For a while I noticed through the window that we was throwing away random bags in the trash. The next day I didn't have uni or work, so I stayed home alone. In the afternoon my doorbell rang. I answered the door. It was my neighbor. He said, "Hi. Can you please come to my apartment because there's a friend of mine inside and something is wrong with his leg?" I looked at him in disbelief and said, "What friend? What's his name?" I asked this to see his reaction and to try to understand whether he was lying or genuinely needed help. He hesitated, then said the name of his friend. I replied, "How long has he been in your apartment and what exactly had happened to his leg? What kind of injury does your friend have?" He seemed to not know the answer right away, but then he replied, "I don't know. He's been at my house for several days and I can't explain what kind of injury it is." I said there's no way I'm entering his apartment, to which he replied, "I'm afraid you don't have a choice. You have to come and help me out." I just shut the door as quickly as possible and locked them. There was no way I'm going inside his apartment. God knows what were his plans for me, and I'm not risking it. A few days later, he rang my doorbell again, asking me to come outside on the street because there's a dead guy, a homeless person who most probably died from cold, and help him. I went outside, and the ambulance was already there. The dead person was already covered up, and there was nothing I could have done. Then he started to ramble about how all of this is connected to some kind of robbery, that some guy robbed him, and now there's a dead body on the street, and everything's connected. I didn't really understand what he meant by that. Was it his friend? Or some other person? Was it the guy who robbed him? Is my neighbor involved in this, or is he just out of his mind? I really didn't want to know, and it seemed that nobody was suspicious of him. I genuinely didn't and still don't know what to believe, because I feel like this guy would truly be capable of murdering someone, in my opinion. He recently made spiked brass knuckles that he used against a policeman. He would often visit near dive bars with a knife in his pocket, threatening to stab people. I mean, there are countless situations I've had to endure with this neighbor. If you want more stories with him, please support me.
What do you think of the story? Leave your thoughts in the comments and give it a like.